12-year-old Eleanor felt the salty sting of sweat in her eyes as she pushed the heavy, rusted, and unreliable pedals of her bicycle. The metal frame groaned under her weight, a rhythmic creak that echoed the deep exhaustion in her bones. Eleanor was currently a child forged in necessity, navigating the steep, unforgiving streets of the city to complete her final delivery. Her bag was strapped to the rack, containing a package that represented her only hope for a small performance bonus. That bonus meant medicine for her younger brother's hacking cough. Her mother was currently working an exhausting and grueling double shift at the factory, leaving Eleanor to carry the weight of their survival on her slender, aching shoulders. She entered the prestigious district, where the glass skyscrapers reached for the clouds like shimmering, indifferent fingers. Here, the air smelled of expensive perfume and high-octane gasoline, a world away from the damp alleyways where she lived. Elena looked out of place in her faded t-shirt and patched shorts that had seen better years. Her sneakers were held together by layers of grey duct tape that had started to peel away from the soles. She ignored the judgmental glances of businessmen, focusing entirely on the ticking clock in her mind and the steep, daunting hill that loomed directly ahead. As she crested the hill, Elena took a jagged breath and began the descent. The wind whipped past her ears, providing a fleeting moment of relief against the heat. She reached for the brake levers, but as she squeezed, a sickening snap vibrated through the metal. The rusted cable, finally surrendering to years of neglect, had broken completely. Panic surged through her like an icy current. The bike accelerated instantly, transforming into a runaway machine. A pedestrian stepped into the crosswalk below, and Elena swerved violently to avoid a collision, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the handles. Her screams of warning were lost in the roar of the traffic. The world suddenly narrowed into a blur of brilliant, metallic red. There was a deafening sound, the crunch of carbon fiber and the screech of metal sliding against luxury paint. Eleanor felt herself being launched into the air, her body tumbling across the hot asphalt before coming to a jarring halt. For a heartbeat, the street fell silent. The only sound was the clicking of her bicycle's front wheel, spinning uselessly in the air. Eleanor lay there, gasping for breath, her knees scraped and bleeding. When she finally looked up, her heart plummeted. Her front wheel was wedged into the side of a pristine Ferrari. A deep, jagged gouge ran across the driver's side door, exposing the dark composite layers beneath the shimmering red exterior. A crowd gathered instantly, forming a circle of onlookers who whispered in worried tones. They looked at the mangled bicycle, and then at the car, a vehicle that cost more than most would earn in a lifetime. Murmurs about lawsuits and repair bills floated through the air, weighing down on Eleanor like stones. She wanted to vanish into the pavement, knowing her mother could barely afford a loaf of bread, let alone the repairs for such a masterpiece. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. The tension in the air was palpable, a thick cloud of anticipation as the crowd waited for the inevitable explosion of owner rage. The silence was shattered by the sharp click of high heels. Sophia emerged from a boutique, her silhouette framed by the golden light of luxury storefronts. She was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. In her hand she held a coffee cup, which slipped from her fingers the moment she saw the wreckage. The coffee splashed onto the sidewalk, ignored, as she stared at the damage. Sophia walked slowly and deliberately toward the girl, her face a mask of cold emotion. She looked at the deep scratch on the red door, and then shifted her gaze to the trembling girl sitting in the dust. Instead of shouting, Sophia did something that stunned every witness. She stepped closer, her shadow falling over the terrified child. Elena flinched, but Sophia simply knelt down in the dirt, ruining her expensive trousers. She didn't look at the Ferrari anymore. Instead, Her eyes were fixed on Eleanor's tape-covered shoes. The businesswoman reached out a gentle hand to steady the girl's trembling, scraped arm. She looked into Eleanor's tear-filled eyes and asked a question that made the busy street fall into a stunned, haunting silence. "Tell me, little one, how long have you been trying to carry the whole weight of the world on your shoulders all alone?" Sophia's voice was as cold as a winter morning, but there was a strange, hidden vibration within it that Elena couldn't quite identify. The crowd expected an immediate arrest, perhaps a scene of shouting and fury. But instead, Sophia gripped the girl's shoulder with a firm but not aggressive hold. She told the curious bystanders to clear the way and ordered her assistant, who had arrived in a sleek black SUV moments later, to open the door. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was certain she was being taken to a police station. "I am not letting you go until I see where you live," Sophia stated, her tone leaving no room for argument or escape. Elena climbed into the plush leather interior of the backup vehicle, her dirty clothes leaving streaks of dust on the seat, but Sophia didn't seem to notice. As they drove away from the glittering boutique district, the silence inside the car was heavy enough to suffocate. Eleanor's tears flowed freely now. She tried to explain through choked sobs that they had no money, that her mother worked until her fingers bled, and that even selling their tiny apartment wouldn't pay for a single tire on that red machine. Sophia stared out the window, her expression unreadable, watching as the glass skyscrapers gradually shrank into dilapidated warehouses, and eventually into the cramped grey outskirts of the city where the streetlights were mostly broken. When the car finally pulled up to a crumbling apartment complex, the stark reality of Elena's life laid itself bare. The air here was thick with the smell of damp concrete and neglect. Sophia stepped out, her designer heels clicking sharply against the cracked pavement. They climbed 3 flights of stairs. Inside the small unit, the air was heavy with the sound of a child's wet, persistent cough. Eleanor's mother, looking years older than her actual age, stood in the center of the room, her face turning ashen as she saw her daughter accompanied by a woman who radiated wealth and power. Standing in that cramped kitchen, Sophia felt a sudden, violent jolt of memory. The sight of the half-empty fridge and the flickering light bulb triggered a flashback she had spent decades trying to suppress. Before the boardrooms and the FERRARIs, Sophia had been a girl in a damp room just like this one. She remembered the taste of hunger and the shame of wearing hand-me-downs. She had clawed her way out through sheer, ruthless ambition, eventually burying her past. Seeing Elena's sick younger brother, who was huddled under a thin, threadbare blanket on the couch, brought it all rushing back. The cold shell she had built around her heart began to show its first hairline fractures. The mother, trembling with fear and exhaustion, reached into a hollowed-out book on a shelf and pulled out a small, tattered envelope. It contained the meager savings they had painstakingly gathered for the boy's next round of treatments. With tears streaming down her face, she held it out to Sophia, begging her not to press charges or take her daughter away. She offered the tiny sum as a down payment for a debt she knew they could never truly settle. Sophia looked at the envelope, then at the mother's desperate eyes. She took the money with a hard, decisive motion, her face returning to that mask of professional indifference. The room went silent as she pulled a high-end smartphone from her pocket and began to dial a number. "I have an address for you," Sophia said into the phone, her voice echoing in the small room. Elena and her mother huddled together, bracing for the arrival of the authorities, convinced their world was about to end. But Sophia wasn't calling the police. She was reading the apartment number to a top-tier medical specialist and a construction contractor, demanding they arrive within the hour with the best equipment available. The confusion in the room was palpable as she hung up, her gaze lingering on the sick boy. The moment shifted from terror to a bewildering, breathless anticipation. Sophia looked down at the thin envelope in her hand, the paper softened by years of nervous handling and the humidity of the cramped room. She could feel the weight of the few crumpled bills inside, representing years of missed meals, grueling shifts, and thousands of sleepless nights. With a deliberate slowness that made Elena's breath hitch in her throat, Sophia reached out and pressed the envelope back into the mother's trembling palms. She didn't just return it. She covered the mother's calloused hands with her own and slid a sleek titanium credit card between them. Elena's mother gasped, trying to pull away from the gesture, but Sophia's grip was firm, warm, and grounding. "The debt is paid," Sophia whispered, her voice no longer a sharp blade, but a steady, calm promise. She explained to the bewildered family that the price of a machine could never outweigh the value of a child's life. To her, the damage to the Ferrari was a mere trifle, a temporary blemish compared to the systemic damage done to this family's dignity by a world that had long forgotten to look their way. Over the following weeks, the grey, crumbling apartment was transformed into a hive of purposeful activity. The construction contractor Sophia had summoned didn't just patch the plaster. His crew moved with precision, tearing out the toxic mold and replacing the ancient leaking pipes that had dampened the family's spirits for years. They installed heavy, double-paned windows that finally kept out the biting winter chill and the roar of the street below. Meanwhile, the medical specialist arrived not with intimidating forms, but with state-of-the-art equipment and specialized medications for Elena's brother. Elena watched in silent awe as her younger brother's persistent, rattling cough began to fade into the background. It was replaced by the sound of steady breathing, and eventually the melodic sound of a weak but genuine laugh. Sophia remained a ghost benefactor, never showing up to collect gratitude. Yet her presence was felt in every fresh grocery delivery and every warm corner of the renovated home. One afternoon, clutching the titanium credit card that had become a symbol of their salvation, Elena navigated the maze of glass skyscrapers in the city center. She felt out of place in her clean but worn clothes, but her heart was fueled by a mission of gratitude. She found herself in Sophia's top-floor office, a quiet, glass-walled space. When Sophia looked up from her mahogany desk, the coldness that had once defined her expression had evaporated. Elena held out the card, her voice trembling as she struggled to find the words to thank the woman who had saved them. Sophia walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the tiny ant-like cars far below. She confessed that the jagged scratch on her Ferrari had been a much-needed wake-up call, a literal line drawn through the artificial lie she had been living. She shared her secret, telling Elena about her own impoverished childhood and the hunger she had tried to drown in a sea of luxury. The accident hadn't ruined her car. It had shattered the ice around her heart, forcing her to remember that she was once that same girl on a broken bicycle, desperate for a single hand to reach out. Sophia didn't just forgive the debt. She transformed it into a permanent investment in the future. She informed Elena that a scholarship fund had been established in her name, ensuring the girl would never have to risk her life on a dangerous delivery route again. Elena's life shifted instantly from desperate survival to a bright, academic path. A few days later, the metallic red Ferrari was back on the road, its door perfectly smooth and gleaming, as if the collision had been a fever dream. Yet, as Sophia sat behind the wheel, she no longer felt the same hollow, vanity-driven pride. Her perspective had been permanently altered by the very accident that should have ruined her day. Now, when the morning sun hits the pavement at the steep hill where the brakes once failed, a different sight greets the neighborhood. Elena rides past that spot every day, no longer on a rusted frame with failing brakes, but on a sturdy, safe, brand-new bicycle. She isn't rushing to beat a delivery clock. She is pedaling towards school, her backpack heavy with books instead of the weight of the world. As she glides past the spot where the red paint once met the grey dust, she smiles with a look of pure hope. It is a profound reminder that a moment of destruction can become the foundation for a new life. A machine was broken, but a human soul was mended, proving that grace is the only currency that truly matters.